G'day, Mighty Destroyers, AOS Coach here, and we are back for all things that are green. It is big war time because there has been a heap of changes from new war scrolls to the changes in the battle scroll for Antor, adjustments, not long ago, and enough rule changes that it's worth re-exploring the mightiest of wars. I am here with Austin Cranfield, who is the greatest starer in the mortal realms. He is the Freddy Krueger of mortal wounds in my dreams. But Austin, I've invited on the channel because not only is a dear friend of mine, but also because he has been playing Big War for such a long time, doing incredibly well in the tournament scene for a number of years, that to make sense of this army, I thought who better to kind of unpack and go, right, well, what do we think of the new War Scrolls? How are we thinking about this in the General's Handbook 2023? And how do I make sense of essentially three armies souped into one? But before we get into it, Austin, introduce yourself and one of Crackhammer's greatest players.
Oh, shucks. So I'm Austin. I've been playing AOS for, I think, almost 4 years at this point. And I've been a Big War player for over a year now. Started with Bone Splitters, and somehow traversed myself into playing Big War and collecting a bunch of Iron Jaws and just practice with them. Took a break from my cities, just started playing Big War, and apparently became a very good Big War player somehow.
It probably actually helps, like cities, combining elves, dwarves, and humans in some type of like synergistic, keyword bingo army, probably did give you an advantage with Big War, given that, and, I'll get this to you from you in a second, but you're essentially bringing in Kruleboyz, Iron Jaws, and Bone Splitters and trying to make it a cohesive force where a lot of the war scrolls don't interact. So I'm sure your experience with cities has kind of like giving you a leg up.
Oh, absolutely. Having the skill to find the little synergies between the clans themselves is just to make the whole army work and be cohesive can be difficult from a list building standpoint, but when you figure it out, the army just works so well together.
So, like, tell me, for the folks at home who have never actually looked into Big War, right? So they've got their Auric War clans and they go straight to Iron Jaws or straight to Kruleboyz because they're just an absolute big yelling fiend. But what is Big War and how does it differ to the other three factions in the book?
So Big War just takes small elements from each of those clans and throws them all together, and they play a completely different game from all the other factions. Like Iron Jaws wants to play, fast hit hard alpha strike. Bone Splitters wants the board control. Kruleboyz wants to sit back and blast away. Big War's more about gaining momentum, kind of like a big pig in a way. You just want to gain that momentum so you can start dictating engagements, as well as like having engagements where you can easily win because you're going to be more consistent, you're going to be more mobile, and yeah, it doesn't play anything like the other factions, and I think that's something people get wrong. They think, oh yeah, I can play Iron Jaws in Big War and just be more consistent, but you're going to lose out on smashing and bashing. You're not going to get your War. But yeah, like, so it wants to like build that momentum and just start steamrolling over your opponent. It's kind of how they work.
So, like, to take a step back and, for those who actually haven't looked at the pages, they probably don't understand the momentum. And we will bring it up shortly, rest assured, and kind of like unpack this because it is interesting, right? Because can I take my 2,000 point Iron Jaws list that I currently run today and literally make it Big War? Yes. Yes. In theory, you absolutely can. But there are trade-offs. Now, should you? Is probably the right question. I can drive with my feet. Does it make a good idea? Shout out to, I think it was Eddie Murphy or Chris Rock who said that many, many years ago on a comedy special. But you can. So, if you get inspired by this discussion, do you need to go out and buy a whole bunch of new models? No, not really. But when you start unlocking it and starting to see where you can take the best of the different factions, or bridge some of the gaps that you have in your current build, you might get inspired to kind of go explore the rest of the green orky factions that are currently not in your collection. Although, Austin, is it a good time to buy Bone Splitters? I don't know. We'll let people be the judge of that, but hopefully you find some good ones on the buy and sell.
Hopefully, but just grab a Wargog.
Wargog's good, man. Wargog is
Yeah.
good, but talk to me about General's Handbook 2023. So we're 3.5 months into this Antorian Locust, Blizzard Wizard, lots of spells, primal dice going on. How does the Big War currently play in the season?
Big War, they're eating well in this season. They can make use of a lot of the magic. They've got a very good unit that can stop the magic. And while the battle tactics might be a bit difficult, they've just got that recent little boost in battle tactics. So they can score, they can play the game extremely well. And a lot of these new spells are fantastic for Big War. Ways to just have like one way to buff your own units, or effectively a discount Wargold profit and another discount Wargold profit in your army. It's just it's crazy.
Having a Wargog profit and multiple Wargog profits if you want to, and having Blizzard, having just multiple threats where it's like, cool, I can kind of avoid that Wargog profit. But when you got little points around the battlefield where you can just do an incredible amount of mortal wounds, does make it a scary proposition, especially with, there's been lots of changes, right? And there's been change to Lookout Sir, which makes it harder to snipe your heroes. A lot of your heroes are those 9 wound or less idiots that you can hide with plenty of bodies.
Which is a good point, because Big War loves taking these small heroes as well. Very important support characters you cannot afford to get sniped out.
You had coherency changes. So, instead of it being 5, it's now 6s, which, I know you've run piggies in the past, and, how does that change? Or even, there's obviously a couple of things that come with coherency, but the way you look at your list and play around with it, because I know when we've played in the past, you play a lot of board presence and board control, and having that flexibility with coherency just gives you even more space, or controls more space.
Yeah, for sure. I know, like, I've seen, I wouldn't personally do it myself, but people have been running 6 pigs in Big War to be just mobile brute unit, and it's great. There's, I don't know, the coherency change hasn't helped too much. It helps with the Gore Grunters mainly, but not really much else in Big War.
No, you're right, because you will often run, and we'll go to your list, so we'll get to it eventually. But you don't run a lot of. Although actually now you got a couple of units that have you got the new weird brutes and the rages, so maybe that will change. We'll get to your thoughts in that in a second.
Yep.
A couple of other big changes is you've obviously had the a couple of points discounts. And I think for me, obviously, the number one that's come out of it is that Gobsprakk, and the sheer terror of Gobsprakk in this current edition. Finally, correct me if I'm wrong, I think we're at the right price point where Gobsprakk is finally hitting at the table, and in a meta that is really taking advantage of it on the table.
For sure. And you know what? He's got the best spell lore in the Orc book as well. So he's great.
Any reason why he's great? Or is there...
Well, we can get to that later.
All right.
I'll keep it vague for now.
All right. Any other changes you like? Because there was points discounts on your brutes. There was discounts on the Beast Skewer Killer Bow. There's been discounts on the Mega Boss on Maw Crusher. Your Swamp Boss on Scumdrek. There's been, although the poor old Marsh Crawler went up a little, which I think is to blame because of Gitz players. Let's be honest.
We don't use him anyway. We don't need it.
No. Any of those other units kind of you like, or have made you think about, they were at the wrong price point, now they're at one that you'd consider?
Well, I can definitely say now, like, brutes are going to be far more favorable now that they're 140 points. Just what is it, like less than 15 points per wound for that unit now, and now they've become the cheapest battle line you can field. All the while you're getting a very solid hard hitting unit on top of that, and if you're running into big hordes like zombies, for instance, you can shut them off for objective control because of their own abilities. But yeah, like I'm not personally someone who uses Kruleboyz a whole lot, but if you're someone that wants to go into a Kruleboyz heavy army for Big War, absolutely you can do that. And the points discounts are going to help, and these new battle tactics probably actually going to make you a little more dominant than an Iron Jaws heavy army, I reckon.
Yeah, we'll get into the battle tactics and I'll bring them up on screen so we can talk about it. But
Yeah.
there's one other change that I think has negatively impacted you, or maybe it hasn't. I'll let you tell me, you be the judge of that. But
Mhm.
your Ardboys. Ardboys used to be a unit of 5 for 80 points. Now they're a unit of 10 for 220. Now the War Scroll has changed. We will talk about it soon. But that used to be cheap bodies that allowed you to have lots of cheap screens that allowed
Yeah.
you to get lots of charge points very quickly. What's the thoughts or what's the impacts of the Ardboy change for you? Just add like not having that 80-point unit.
Yep. It does suck to lose such a cheap battle line unit just like that. I always found our Ardboys played two roles. You could either play them as little 5-man units, which you can use for ball control, disruption, and cheap battle line, or you can play them as a 15-man unit, of which I think the new Ardboys play that role instead of the little MSU unit. But yeah, it does suck. I loved running 5 units of Ardboys just for the little utility you can get out of them. But we got to adapt and improvise, and you know what? We've got a bunch of new units anyway to compensate.
Have you dropped them completely from? And we'll go through the list. We know that,
Yeah.
but has that meant that you've had to drop them completely because their points are too expensive, and you've now got to find an alternative battle line option, or are you just gutting your list so you've now still got them in your list? Their role might have changed a little bit. Their points obviously are much greater than what you were paying, and now you've got to cut down on the heroes or cut down on the other units to keep that list at 2K.
Yeah, I find I'd struggle to really take more than 10 Ardboys. They're just too expensive. I'm always taking 6 heroes, and it's hard to have almost 900 points of heroes and 440 points because I want 20 Ardboys. It doesn't leave me with a lot of options, so at most I'll probably just take 10, if any at all.
Yeah, that's the problem, right? If you had 3 units of 10 Ardboys to fulfill your battle line, that's 660.
Yeah,
That's not a hero.
it's
That
too
is like
much.
that's a lot. It's a lot. And I know the style that you play and the way that you've really kind of like racked up this momentum score that you've talked a little bit about is through having lots of units on the table. And I think at my tournament a couple of weeks ago, did you not have 5 battalions? Like you just had enough bodies on the table. I've never seen 5 battalions in my life.
I took 5 whole battalions for. I might as well. From a lot of drops, I might as well just have as many battalions as I can.
You might as well, Austin. You
Might as
might as
well.
well. So we've kind of danced around the rules and I've referred to them in the future tense. Well, it is now present. And let's talk a little bit about the rules. And I guess first off is you mentioned it a little bit earlier that you kind of get the best of the different areas, right? So this is a combination of your Kruleboyz, your Iron Jaws, and your Bone Splitters.
Yeah.
And what's really interesting is that you get a sample of their rules, but you don't get them all. So, for example, the venom encrusted weapons comes from Kruleboyz, your mighty destroyers comes from Iron Jaws, your war paint comes from your Bone Splitters. But the caveat, and we talked about that Iron Jaws player, for example, lifting their army from an Iron Jaws and putting the exact same build into the Big War, is that you would lose smashing and bashing.
Mhm. Yeah.
And you would, yeah, so like that. So for example, how valuable is that to you? And is the worth the trade-off? So we kind of alluded to the fact that um, you can shift it, but are you making the most of it? But
Yeah.
I'll throw it to you. Like when you look at these particular rules, right? The here we go, here we go, here we go, and the cunning, brutal, and savage at a list construction and as a army composition and building the most competitive side of the list that you possibly can. How do you think about these two particular rules? Not the power of the wire yet, just the first two sets.
So looking at a Cunning, Brutal, and Savage, Venom encrusted weapons is kind of what makes Cruel Boys Cruel Boys. That's where they get the damage output. That's just how the units have to operate. They're there to roll Mortys and nothing more, which is great if you want some good damage output.
So just to
Because
pause you there for a second. So for anyone who doesn't know this rule, if the unmodified hit roll for the attack for a Cruel Boys Orc unit is a 6, it causes a number of mortal wounds equal to the weapon's damage characteristic.
yeah,
The sequence does end, and it has no effect on mounts unless stated otherwise.
yeah, it's kind of a nice counterbalance for Iron Jaws because Iron Jaws is kind of pure raw damage, but it's not really mortal wound damage. So that where Iron Jaws can bounce off high armor, Cruel Boys can push through it just because of mortal wounds. So yeah, without Venom encrusted weapons, you wouldn't see Cruel Boys that often in Big War.
No, and the most common build of this is going to be through your beast skewer bows. No, not beast skewer bows, the man
Bolt
skewer
Boys.
bows, the bolt boys. Yeah, there's two versions. You got your little shooters, and then you got the big monster one. That's probably the most common build that people kind of see, and
Yeah,
you can bring this down, Austin. It's not just sixes. You can bring this down to
and
a lower roll.
in fact, you can boost the amount of mortal wounds if you take a Sludge Breaker as well, which it works. It's good.
So what I'm saying though is that if you like the mortal wounds, and you're right, as an Ironjaw player, you have impact mortal wounds like your Gore Grunters, for example, but you don't have a lot of mortal wounds outside of it. So if you
Yeah,
come up against, let's say, an OBR faction or that Ethereal Vampire Lord on Zombie Dragon or Nighthaunt, and you're finding your Rens just not cutting it, you do have the option of going Venom encrusted weapons, whether it's shooting, whether it's like your gut rippers, whether it's something within the faction or multiple versions of it. And as you've mentioned, bringing it down, you can bring it down to fives. Can you bring it down any lower than fives? Or you can
no,
increase the
just
damage.
fives. You just increase it on sixes with a certain unit.
Yeah.
But Mighty Destroyers, very good trait to take from Iron Jaws. Iron Jaws traditionally is very slow, so having a way to boost their mobility, because if you're outside of 12 of an enemy unit, you get to make a normal move. It's really good for your cavalry that's moving 9 inches, pretty slow for cav, or your infantry that's moving 4 inches, so you can effectively double their movement. Or for a command point, if you're within 12, you can make a hero phase charge. Well, you have to make a hero phase charge. Can be a detriment sometimes, but I also find that it's really good utility to just prevent an enemy unit from redeploying or unleashing hell, or against Khorne, being able to blood tithe move into you. Murder Lust, that's what it's called. So
It,
I absolutely love Mighty Destroyers. Very good rule to take into Big War.
It's an interesting one because you've got to really be precise on where your models are on the table. Because if you are within 12, you can't choose to make the move. You are
No,
predetermined that there's three options, right? If you're within 12, you must. Sorry, if
if
you're outside of 12, you can make a normal move. If you're within 12, you've got to make the charge. If you're within 3, you've got to
you got to
pile
pile in.
in. Yeah, so it's not like you have a choice. It's going to be depending on where your models are. So not locking yourself out of what you wanted to do because you moved that 1 inch too close, or not looking out for where models are on the table can really ruin you with your mighty destroyers.
It can be good for like fixing some of your mistakes. Maybe, for instance, a War Chanter is out of buff range. Uh, I'll just Mighty Destroys, move him closer. Now he's in range. I can give that buff. It's all happening in the hero phase. So, it, yeah, it's a very, very good ability to have.
Yeah, I dig it. And can you do it multiple times, by the way?
You can. If you take a lovely guy called the Mega Boss, either on foot or on a mount, or Gordrak even if you'd like, you can do it up to 2 to 3 times. For one command point, I should add.
It's very
Yep.
generous to be able to get multiple charges in, advance up the board, especially in turn one, where you want to get, as you mentioned, in range of either spell casting or not
Yeah.
unbinding, spell casting, or set yourself up for the next turn, or just to get onto an objective.
It's one of the most valuable commands you have in this army for sure.
And then the war paint is a ward of 6. Is it 6 up ward?
It is a 6 up ward.
Okay.
It kind of sucks.
It's all right. Like
it,
I
it
think the
does
expression on my
one thing.
face. Yeah.
It does one thing, and it makes the Wurgog work, and that's kind of all the value I see in it for Big War, at least.
And you do obviously, for anyone who we talked a little bit about the Wargog Prophet, and
Yep.
because he does a bunch of mortal wounds, but it can also hurt itself. There obviously is artifacts you can support it, but if you want to take multiple, you still get that 6 up ward save, which is, I guess, better than nothing.
Yeah, like it's fine, but I think for the rest of the army, or the Bone Splitters roster, I should say, it's just not really enough to make them worthwhile. But,
No, I mean,
yeah. And then here we go. It's a hero action I'll always use turn 1, maybe turn 2 as well. Very simple. You roll a dice. If you beat the current battle round, you get war points equal to the battle round. So battle round 1, you roll a 2 up, you get 1 war point. Battle round 2, 3 up, you get 2 war points. It's just a nice little way just to boost your war points early. If you get really lucky and roll that 6 turn 1, you'll be up to 9 war points. Add that's +1, so that's 10. You'll be running and charging at a +1 at least.
all right. So we're kind of jumping ahead a little bit here. Maybe we kind of like take that step back to go, well, what is the WAR stuff, right? Because you've already mentioned it, right? You've mentioned this momentum. We've already seen this reference to WAR points. So why on earth would I trade off my heroic action to generate a extra command point, Titanic Finest Hour, an extra unbind? Like, why am I sacrificing these options for a couple of extra points? So you got on the table on the right side. We'll get to that in a second, but I think it's important to talk a little bit about the generation, right? So I can sacrifice my heroic action to get a couple of points. Tick, acknowledge that. What's the other ways that I can get these WAR points?
Oh, well, we're going to start at the list building. So you get D6 for having your general on the battlefield. Has to be a general you've picked, by the way. I looked it up.
Mm-hmm.
I think so. I'm confusing it. Whatever. You need your general.
Mm-hmm.
You get 2 if you have at least a war chanter. So don't get this confused. If you have 2 war chanters, you'll only get 2. But it just means if you have 2 and 1 dies, you're still going to get 2. It's the same for Bone Splitters Wizards. You'll get 1, but you can't stack that. You get 1 for every charge you make with an orc unit in the charge phase, and 1 for every orc unit that's in combat within 3 inches of an enemy unit at the end of the combat phase. Plus, then you have your hero action.
Yeah, so I've got myself a War Chanter, that's 2. I get a Bone Splitter Wizard, that's 1. I make a charge or 2. Obviously, I can get multiple, plus the D6, plus the 3, the here we go. So I'm racking up these points over time, and I get basically, what do I do with it? It's kind of like if you've ever played Slaanesh or Khorne, for example, there's a bunch of things that happen, right? So when you got 8 points, I've got +1 to run rolls for orc units, which ticks all of the boxes for all of the troops in our army, which is great. You can get +1 to your charge rolls at 10 WAR points, +1 to casting, dispelling, and unbinding at 12, +1 to hit at 16, +1 to wound at 20, and then at 24, I'll let you explain this. And this is the WAR.
So at 24 WAR points, you can call the WAR, which for that combat phase, your whole army gets +1 attack and melee. The downside is at the end of that combat phase, you lose every war point. So be careful when you use this. Don't just use it all the time. Because you might find it's going to be harder to rack those war points back up if you're back at 0 later in the game. But it can be it's a really nice ability to have if you're on the back foot and you kind of need to push your way out of it.
So it might be worth mentioning as well that these are cumulative, right? So when you hit +1 to wound, you've also gained +1 attack and +1 to casting and unbinding, +1 to charging, and +1 to run roll. So you're essentially, to Austin's point, building up momentum for this strike. And if you've got that 24 points, you can unleash that war and just have like this multiple rounds of sheer pain. But you better kill what you wanted to kill, because you're back to 0. And how often would you hit that 24? Is it once a game, twice a game?
I'd probably hit it maybe twice a game. I think sometimes I'll probably hit it by turn 2, like maybe about half the time. If I'm not hitting up to 20 at least by turn 2, I'm in trouble.
Okay, so by turn 2, you really want to be hitting 20 or more, because why?
The moment you hit 20, you're pretty much in control of the pace of combat. You can already start dictating those fights. You're more guaranteed to start removing pieces from the battlefield. It's also going to make your opponent go, do I want to commit? Because +1 to hit and wound, they're going to hit hard. I don't know if I want to do that. But yeah.
Do you find yourself going into combat in turn 1? Because I know when I play Daughters of Khaine, for example, who has a similar effect, right? Battle round 1, I get X, battle round 2, I get Y. And, Hagnar lets me speed that up a little bit. I never fight turn 1. Like, I always hold back. And even if I get priority and I'm like, oh, I don't feel like I'm ready to strike yet, I will hold back until I feel like I'm ready. Are you in a similar kind of vein, or are you wanting to get into combat ASAP because you want to rack up these extra points for charging?
It depends. Like, it can really depend on your list, but for me, not really. You might send one unit out there to maybe just remove a piece from the battlefield and maybe rack up a couple war points by doing that. But yeah, like, you're not going to send your whole army unless your opponent's right in your face and you kind of need to do something about it.
Yeah, I imagine you are doing some trade-offs, and I think this is why the new Ardboy War Scroll is tough, because at 80 points you used to be able to run it in, get the charge, get the extra point, do a little bit of chip damage, maybe control an objective for a little bit. But if you're taking small units or multiple units, you're able to generate more of those off the charge. You're able to kind of control parts of the board. While if I was to take like the 6 unit of Pit the Gore Grunters, sure, the +1 to hit, +1 to wound is probably going to go a lot further, but it might take you a little bit longer to rack up those points given how expensive they can be.
For sure. With even how you play, you might also want to deploy in a way so if your opponent does come at you turn 1, you want to make sure they can pull in as many of your orc units as possible, because everyone that's in combat by the end of that turn is going to be a war point. I played against a mate recently where I think he gave me 7 war points by charging 1 unit in, and by the end of my turn 1, I was up to 20 and just dictating the game from that point. So
interesting.
It's a very powerful rule, but you got to know how to play it.
And any advice on, like, let's say I was a newbie playing Big War, what advice would you give to me with this? Because you're right, like, it's something that as a Daughters of Khaine player, I had to kind of get my head around, because Daughters of Khaine is all about running in and doing combat, right? I'm a bit of a glass cannon. I can't take the damage, but rushing in too quickly, I will lose my army before I get my full buffs. Counter to that is if I hold out for too long trying to get the maximum buffs, my opponent charges me, I might lose some key pieces, or I'm down on my battle tactics and objectives.
Yeah, I think it's always going to be important to remember, if you're playing a massive Ironjawz Big War army, you're not Ironjawz. You're not going to be able to dictate your combat activations like you would in Ironjawz. You don't want to go in too hard, too fast. You want to really pick your engagements. So that, you don't want to send 2 hammer units into 2 enemy hammers, because yeah, you'll kill one, but you'll lose the other. There's not much point. Big War's all about trading up, and you want to really pick those engagements. And you just use your screens. Just use your screens to roadblock. I'm never expecting mine to hold the ground forever. They're just gonna roadblock, tie you up for a turn, maybe rack a wild point up or 2. But yeah, just gotta be cautious. Use your little pieces like the Wurrgog to deny a whole area, because they're not gonna come in with their big boys and risk losing them.
We've talked Wargog a few times now. Maybe for the folks who haven't looked at the War Scroll, maybe they don't venture out into Bone Splitter territory very often. Can you give me like a bit of a higher level view of like why the Wargog Prophet is a good unit, and why you might want to consider putting it in your list?
So Wurrgog, to me, I find he's a really strong ball control piece. He's a very cool little ability. It comes at the trade-off of not casting spells, which he's a 2-caster, so it can be a trade-off. But he picks an enemy unit within 12 inches, and you roll 3+. And on that first roll, regardless of what you roll, on that 3+, it's D3 mortal wounds. If you roll 1 or 2, nothing happens. After that roll, every 3+ you roll is D3. Every 1 or 2 you roll, the Wurrgog takes D6 mortal wounds. But she's 7 wounds, so he can't die in the first fail. And on top of that, he's got the war paint saves. He's going to have a 6-up. But you can take an artifact to boost it to a 4-up, which really makes him great. And you can keep doing that until the unit dies, the Wurrgog dies, or you elect to stop. On top of that, you can make it even better if he's already taken damage. You can use your hero action to heal him up before he starts staring, or even afterwards to heal him up.
It's start of combat, right? Sorry, so it's start of the turn. Sorry,
start of the hero phase.
Yes, start of the hero phase. So you couldn't use like a teleport, or you can't do any shenanigans. Like, it is literally when you pick your battle tactic, when you do your heroic recovery, and or you do the stare. So being it in your turn, you get to choose, right? So you could do stare then heal, or heal then stare.
Yeah. So yeah, there's no shenanigans outside of the healing to him. But if your opponent wants to not lose their full Fulminators, they're not going to come close to this guy. Otherwise, they're going to risk it.
And the change of the lookout, sir, if it's hugging a battle line unit, then it really is only going to be targeted by area of effects, or if you're within 12, and that's literally striking distance for the Wargog stare, that you basically will, more times often than not, you will get more value out of the stare if played correctly than when you lose it or if you die quickly. Like, you'll just take away. Like, I know, when you and I have played, there's been times where you've killed like 3 Stormdrake Guard, like 3 dragons. You've done an incredible amount of mortal wounds, but then sometimes it does nothing.
Oh yeah. There is another interesting thing to note with him, at least. Example came up in Sydney Slaughter with the old Ardboys, but I had 4 of them left out of a unit of 15. I wanted to rally them back, but the Wurrgog, start of the hero phase, stared at the unit tying them up, killed the unit. It's still start of the hero phase. I can rally the guys. So it can be really good for freeing up units you want to rally as well, which can come in with the new Ardboys too.
Being that rally is start of combat as well, so your turn, and it's only your turn as well, so it's not a shooting attack. It's not happening. You can't unleash hell and unleash the mask. It is a hero phase thing instead of casting.
Yeah, A very good unit though.
So when we go back to the Power of the War, obviously we're racking up points. It's starting at the list building construction. There's a couple of other things that are happening throughout the game. Ideally, by battle round 2, I really should be at 20 to 24 points. When I go in for the attack, I unleash the War and, getting that +1 to hit, +1 to wound, and +1 attack through.
I'll actually very rarely use the War in a game at all.
Okay.
Because once you use it, you've lost all your War points. So I'm probably just going to keep it most of the time and either use it to get myself back in the game in a critical moment or to really make sure I just win the game right then and there. Because there is something to the War points that we haven't touched on yet, but we'll get to it when it comes to battle tactics.
Cool. So once I get to 24, just because I get to 24 doesn't mean I need to spend them.
Exactly.
You will find often getting +1 to hit, +1 to wound, and just holding that boost can be far more beneficial than going for the extra attack and then the reset.
Yeah, exactly.
Anything else about these rules, or should we bring in these battle tactics we've referred to a few times?
Let's bring in the battle tactics. We've touched on
All
this
right.
enough.
All right, so we kind of get a good idea of the allegiance ability. So we get a couple from Kruleboy. We get Kruleboys, Ironjawz, Bone Splitters. We get something from those guys.
Yeah.
By the way, we can also pull in from their command traits. We can pull in from their spells. We can pull in from, depending on who you're choosing from the different factions, there's a lot of list construction options. And ultimately, we're generating points to get these WAR stuff that either is +1 hit, +1 wound, +1 charge, +1 casting, and we can unleash the WAR once and get 24 and cash it out.
Yeah.
But you've also got this change that happened recently in the battle scroll for Antor, where you tell me, what was most impactful of this change? Because there wasn't any points decreases specifically in this war scroll.
It's these new Auric War Clan battle tactics. So I think what makes them so great is that they look like they're specific to just Ironjawz and Kruleboys, but they actually share it with Big War, funnily enough. And weirdly enough, the Kruleboys one actually is probably easier to do in Big War than Kruleboys.
Yeah, so like I'll read it out, and then you can tell me why you think this is true. And by the way, I agree with you wholeheartedly.
Oh yeah,
but
full Kruleboys.
But all right, so the battle there's 3 battle tactics. There's 3 battle tactics. Not cool. Oh no, I'm just reading. Yep, the Kruleboys. Sorry, I was looking at the Kruleboys rule. So you've got 1 for Kruleboys, 1 for Ironjawz. So sneak up, you complete the tactic. If at the end of the turn, every friendly Kruleboys unit is within 3 inches of a terrain feature and is more than 3 inches from all enemy units. Now, if I'm a Kruleboys unit, that's tough. I've got 8 to 12 or 14 different units, all got to be hugging a terrain feature. It means that I'm not charging in anything, or even in turn 1, it does mean my whole army is hugging a bunch of terrain to score my battle tactic.
Yeah. Meanwhile, in Big War, listen to my list in particular, but regardless, if you're playing Big War, you probably have like 1 to maybe 4 or 5 Kruleboys units in your army. And it's not that hard to manage that. In turn 1, they're not really I'm going to send these guys forward to do some damage. That's the Gorgrunner's job. So you can easily just hold these guys back, and it's a free win battle tactic turn 1.
That's really powerful, and I was going to call that out because most armies at the moment are struggling for that turn 1 battle tactic, and often are relying on magical dominance or intimidate the invaders. And in some cases, intimidate the invaders is near impossible in the first turn.
Oh yeah,
and magical dominance can be really tough as well. Why is this so obvious, right? Because you've got 2 to 4 units approximately in your type of Kruleboy contingent of Big War.
Yeah, it's just put them near terrain. Don't send them in combat. Easy done. It's really just that simple.
And in your list, what are the type of Kruleboy units that would like work really well in this one?
Well, I've only just been running Gobsprakk recently, so my list has only got 1 Kruleboys unit, and I just have to ensure he's near terrain and not in combat. and done. But Bolt Boys, it's not hard to put them near some terrain. Put a Shaman, he's going to stick with them, so he's going to be near terrain. But it might be better because they get cover on top of that, and they're small units. If you got a Breaker Boss, put him behind your screens and just make sure he's within 3 of terrain. Like it's stupidly easy to score in Big War. There's not much to think about.
Yeah, as long as you don't misplay this one and you don't put your, if you do advance, because you can still advance up the board turn one, but as long as you're hugging terrain, you're pre-measuring to make sure that your movement, or you've got to do a run roll in order to get to that piece of terrain as you advance up the board, or you just hold the backfield, however that might look.
Yeah,
that's like the old. It's an easy one.
And in fact, like it's such an easy battle tactic that if I can score something else turn one, I'll do that, and then have that as a backup if I don't have a good battle plan up my sleeve, or battle tactic up my sleeve.
Yeah. You could do this all 5 rounds, I guess, and the more the game goes on, you may or may not have less Cruel Boys on the table, which means that it's a much easier. I like this as turn one. I will admit, turn one, set it up, guarantee battle tactic. Don't have to worry. Turn two, go into your regular sequence and bait and trap or whatever.
And that takes us to That's Our Turf.
Yeah, the other one is That's Our Turf Now. And that is specifically for a Iron Jaws one. You complete the battle tactic if at the end of the turn, 2 or more friendly Iron Jaws units are within 3 inches of the center of the battlefield. Is this just as easy, or is this a harder one?
I won't say it's as easy, but as the game goes on, it's a very good tactic to do battle round, maybe 2, 3, 4. Just have a couple of your heroes just move within 3 of the center, and it's easy done. In fact, I know like at Sydney GT, one of my games, what was it called? The No Reward Without Risk, where you can just start as close as you want to your own line. It's like, I'll just put 2 Ardboy units in the center. Oh, my battle tactic's done.
Bingo. I'm going to call you Orc Zinch at this point. Manage easy things you can score. But run your piggies, run your Ardboys, run your brutes, run your mega, your mega boss, run your Maw Crusher. Obviously, you've got to have 2 or more. So if you're running a mostly Bone Splitters, or you're running mostly Cruel Boy in your Big War,
it'd be a bit more difficult. But as I said, like it's not the hardest thing to get your heroes into the middle, where they probably are going to support the army anyway.
Well, it's not even heroes; it's just units, right? It's 2 or more friendly Iron Jaws units, so you can run 2 units of.
I bring up heroes just because they're a small footprint.
True.
But yeah, it's not always guaranteed turn one, but it's definitely a very good middle battle tactic to just take, as long as you prepare for it.
And I think the cool thing as well is that it does free you up with so many. Like the general handbook does have some good battle tactics you can use. A lot of them are situational, but when you start getting into, having to charge, or being on the sides of the board, or having to cast a spell or kill something with a spell, all of a sudden you start to unlock, because you've scored 1 or 2 easy battle tactics, and you've just got to find three either from your from General's Handbook or any other ones that are available to you.
Yeah, which Big War have 3 to 4 easy battle tactics, including these 2. One of which, I don't know if you have a slide on the battle tactics, but
no, not this one.
One of them does relate to your war points. If you have, it's called wait for it, lads. If you have 24 or more war points, you can choose it. And all it requires you to have is 30 war points by the end of the turn. So even if you're already sitting on 30 war points, you've got it. It's done. So it's another really easy battle tactic to accomplish. And the other one is more beneficial if you go with a Cruel Boys general. And it just requires you to do 10 damage to your opponent and not take 10 damage from damage taken from enemy units, which is funny because if the Wurgog hurts himself, it doesn't count towards that count.
No, because you're taking damage, but it's not being caused by an enemy unit. So
It's
if that's
self-inflicted.
correct,
Yeah.
that's beautiful. That's a beautiful little pick up there.
I don't really have a Cruel Boys general, so I don't get access to it. But I find with even 3 battle tactics, it's really nice and easy for me anyway.
I got to
So I've
ask you. I've got to ask you because it's on the screen. Destroyer of Empires. Are you ever taking Kragnos in a big war list?
Nope.
Why? Poor old Craggy.
He doesn't help my army that much. Like he's not an orc. Doesn't benefit from war. Doesn't generate war.
All he's giving you is the 3d6 charge, and obviously just being a damage dealer himself.
Like you could probably make a weird list with him, but he's not my cup of tea.
That was a loaded question. I knew
Yeah.
the answer was no, but just on screen, I'm like, oh, you got a battle tactic for Craggy. Poor
Yeah.
old Craggy. But look, long story short, you got 2 good battle tactics that you can choose from the Battle Scroll Antor, in addition to what's in your general's handbook, in
Yep.
addition to what's in your battle tome. So you are flush with battle tactics, and probably why I've seen a lot of competitive people talking now about Big War, because if you're looking to score yourself 5 out of 5 battle tactic, which is often one of the tiebreakers or one of the big pieces to score at a tournament, if you can get 5 and you got a lot of good options, this is half the battle. Now all you got to worry about is being able to score more points from standing on circles than your opponent.
And I think we're seeing that. Like Big War is actually starting to be really elevated in, I guess, the meta. I think like the recent stats said they're up to like 55%. They're getting close to overpowered.
Yeah, they went from like a bottom middle where they were like 46, 48%, and they're rising slowly through the meta, depending on if you look at Wohammer or Games Workshop stats. And, everyone has their own methodology, but you can see very quickly, between the points changes, some of the rules changes, and now these battle tactics and things like that, they are creeping back up. So it could be a good time for you to be looking into Big War.
Yeah, absolutely.
Anything else you want to talk about here when it comes to battle tactics?
Maybe not battle tactics, but they've also got a really good grand strat as well. You can always take. I mean, like the spellcasting savant is solid if you have a really small wizard general. But there's also War. Just have a general or a battle line unit in enemy territory by the end of the game. Also really good. Very rarely do I not get that one, and it's usually because I'm tabled.
Yeah, I mean, it plays into your strengths, right? That's exactly what you want to do. Probably one thing I was really curious to hear from you is, given that the Big War Allegiance gives you a point for having, say, a Bone Splitter Wizard, and there are a lot of good wizard options in the army, do you find yourself in a position where you're taking a Nullstone Adornment because you're not going to wizard?
I don't really see much point.
Because
Like you, but not taking a wizard, like you're missing out on a war point a turn. And one of the abilities that war gives you is a bonus to your magic, which you're not going to get any benefit, like which obviously it's like a bonus you can get that you're not going to benefit from because you don't have any wizards. So yeah, I don't really see much point in having these. And if you really want to stop magic, you've got a good option in the list anyway. So who cares?
I was literally going to say that even if you don't go into the Bone Splitter Wizard or you go into a Iron Jaws Wizard, you've still got Gobsprakk, who is giving you some really good unbinding abilities. And that would then take you off the table of taking a Nullstone Adornment, because even though it's not an Entorian Locus, it is a wizard, which means must be really hard to build a non-wizard list in Big War.
Yeah, I just don't think you would ever.
Yeah. I tend to agree with you. So there's probably no point talking about these 3 because, like you've got a lot of really good spells, and that's probably part of why I would say you're going to take a wizard, so the Nullstone, because you have the option of taking a wizard from the Cruel Boys and unlocking the Cruel Boy spell lore. You can go into the Ironjaws spell lore. You can go into the Bone Splitter spell lore. And then for your Antorian Locuses, which is most of your wizards, outside of like Gobsprakk and any other named wizard. Actually, is Gobsprakk your only named wizard?
Named wizard? Technically, no. There's the Wurgog in the Bone Splitters Warband.
Of course, the Warband.
Which you never take.
No, I mean you take it as the alternative sculpt for your Wargog, but never the unit. But you have so many good spell choices here, and you already alluded to being able to tap into Hoarfrost to change and modify a hit, a wound, or a rend characteristic. We've already talked about Blizzard as a great spell to do mortal wounds, and it could either be a supplement for your Wargog, or it could be another threat. And having the Wargog on one point, Wizard with Blizzard on the other point, and just terrifying your opponent. Outside of them, what are some of the good spell choices that you would recommend or consider as a player?
So I'm a big fan of probably the entire Kruleboyz spell lore. And it's also what makes Gobsprakk great, because he just knows all those spells. But personal favorites from that would be Choking Mist. It's a long-range spell. You pick a point within 24 inches, and every enemy unit within 6 cannot run, and they're -1 to their melee attack until your next hero phase. So it can be very good for just nerfing, like debuffing a hammer unit, or like even preventing their mobility. There was a funny game I had where my opponent scored 0 points turn 1 because they couldn't run onto the one objective, and there was no battle tactics they could score. And we're going to see Nasty Hex becoming very good these days as well, because there's lots of ward saves out there, and a very good way to just down a tanky unit is just to remove that ward save.
Yeah, and with cities coming along, I know people are getting a bit annoyed with the Warforger and also the Pope, the Pontifex, which is both creating wards. Being able to shut down wards and being able to remove wards, and it's powerful. It's so good. Next, Nasty Hex. Would I want to put this on a single casting wizard? Probably not. But when Gobsprakk knows the entire spell lore, that's brutal.
Because hard to use with a little foot hero, but with Gobsprakk, you'll see the Sneaky Miasma spell. You can pick a Kruleboyz monster and they can make a normal move. So you can have Gobsprakk, who might be out of range, cast Sneaky Miasma, move him, and now he's in range of Nasty Hex. I can cast that now. He's a 2-cast wizard, by the way.
While your smaller wizards will probably benefit from, say, Choking Mist, which has that range 24, right?
Yeah.
So I like the combination, by the way, Sneaky Miasma into Nasty Hex.
Yeah, it's so good.
What about the others? Like, obviously, the great big green hand of Gork. Like, being able to teleport around the board is always valuable.
And it's actually one of those tools that is very cross-compatible. It works with any Auric unit. It doesn't have to be an Ironjaws unit. Just any Orcs, it works. So you can combo well with maybe a Kruleboyz monster, and you've given him the Fasten mount trait. So you can have him teleport and then make a normal move. Now he's guaranteed the charge. It's really good with Gorgrunners, who can be teleported, Mighty Destroyers to move, and now they're outside of 3. It's a guaranteed charge. Or, just to teleport someone, like maybe a War Chanter that's out of position, to buff a unit that's further away. Or there's lots of utility you just have with a teleport.
Your Bolt Boys as well, right? Because they would then not be counted as moving.
Yeah, so that's a bit of a... Like, it's great to get the Bolt Boys to be in a position where they can fire a long-range shot, but they won't benefit. They can't fire double shots because it requires them to move.
Yep, cool. So I know Cities has been playing around with those rules. I'm like, how's this work with Orcs? But either way, long story short, where you can teleport onto objectives, move a unit onto the side of the board, move a buff piece into range. Any kind of teleport always valuable. Like it's one of the spells in my gits list that I always take. Being able to teleport Hand of Gork.
I can even see Foot of Gork maybe seeing some play in a magic heavy army. It's a casting value of 10, which before was like, yeah, get real. I'm not ever casting that, but with Primal Dice in the mix, it's actually very doable. And it's fairly long range too. It kind of works like the Butcher spell from Ogres, but instead of D3 mortal wounds on a 4, and then you keep going on a 4-up, it's D6 mortal wounds, and you keep going on a 4-up.
If you're building around a lot of like Iron Jaws going into combat, and you're worried about hitting your big war points, I guess the Basham lads might work quite nicely. But is it better than Foot of Gork or the teleport? Probably not.
No, like Basham, that's again for me just becomes irrelevant by turn 2 anyway. And there's not that many -1 to wound debuffs going around, so
better in Iron Jaws, but if
Yeah.
you, to your point, if you plan on like racking them up and then cashing them out, it's a way to kind of get that +1 to wound back into your army when you cash out.
yeah.
But
There might be times where it's useful, but I just don't think it's enough to warrant it.
agreed. I'm just posing. I'm posing thoughts. Just
Yeah,
putting it out
it's all
there.
good.
Putting it out there in the world.
And Mighty
and
Headbutt we can ignore.
Yeah, poor old Mighty Headbutt. And then your Bone Splitter Wizards. Like, is there any ones that you would be taking? Or yeah.
If you're someone who really wants to take some Bone Splitters units that aren't heroes, I can see Glow Green Tusks as pretty good for your piggies. Just takes their Tusk weapon and just improves the Rend by 2, which actually combos nicely with Hoarfrost, weirdly enough. But I think the spell you probably just see more often would be Gorka Morka's Warcry, which is just a fight last spell, and there's some shenanigans you can pull to get your guys into range with that one too.
Like what?
So you can always teleport your wizard into range. If you take a Maniac Weirdnob, you can take the Fasten Mount trait, move him in the hero phase, and then cast it. And that's about it. But there's some play to it.
I mean, there's two options. That's pretty good, right? And fight last is a very valuable tool to be able to reduce the amount of damage coming in, and manipulating the board. It's always like, especially for you that wants to run in multiple waves or multiple units going in, being able to choose something to fight last means that you get 2 bites at the apple. Potentially, and really reduce the amount of damage coming back into you.
I will add a caveat with it, because most lists will often just take a single Wurgog. And the downside to Warcry is if you're in range to make something fight last, often you're in range to stare at it. And if it's an important unit, like, you might as well just try and kill it outright, eh?
Yeah, I get the feeling you want to stare it off as opposed to fight last.
Exactly.
If you can do those mortal wounds, I don't imagine many situations where Warcry comes over staring something off. Maybe you're in your last wound and you can't afford it.
Yeah, it's very rarely come up. I might just teleport Wurgog to then cast it, but that's about it for me.
Rupture. Good spell to have or useless for you?
I probably wouldn't take it as a spell slot. But, if you take a certain command trait where you know all the Hoarfrost spells, it's not the worst thing. Like, it's not a bad silver bullet to have if you run into an incarnate. Because as the changes occurred now, you can't rupture your own incarnate anymore. And when you rupture an incarnate, you not only make I think you make a wild still, but you drop it down a level, which means if it's level 1, you can go in and kill it just immediately.
How are you dropping it? Sorry.
I think it's the new change to rupture, where if you hit an incarnate with it drops down a level.
All right, maybe that's literally from Warcom. Let me check the tapes on that one while you tell me about who are good recipients for the Hoarfrost.
For wizards or for units?
Units. Like if you're going to cast Hoarfrost, which I know you're going to,
Yeah.
are there particular units or particular characteristics that you want to kind of bring down, given that you're getting +1 to hit, +1 to wound as you rack up the big war points?
I think the new art, like some of the new units, like the Ard Boys, the Rages, the Wreckers. There might even be a time where it can help Brutes. Might be a bit difficult because they're already Ren 2 with some of their weapons.
And by the way, you are 100% correct. So it says there, then pick the. It's probably on the screen. Am I blind? It's literally on the screen. I don't know why I'm doing that. It says it there. Inflict D3 mortal wounds to the bonded unit. Then the incarnate immediately loses power level to a minimum of 1 and becomes wild. It's literally on screen.
So it's a nice silver bullet.
It's a late Sunday, folks. It's a late Sunday. So like that's powerful, right? Going from a level 2 to a level 1 does make it a lot more manageable. It means the trick being able to like eat your own endless spell and power up to level 3 becomes a lot harder because you can't.
Yeah. But yeah, I think one of the other best candidates for Hoarfrost are actually the Gore Grunters, because they already have like a Ren 2 weapon, but their mounts are just as consistent, but they lack any rend. So regardless of what you roll, you're gonna benefit that weapon profile. And even if you roll like your average 2, you're looking at 22 attacks that are Ren 2 damage at 2s and 2s. That's a pretty big power increase for 170 points.
Is that all? Only 22 attacks?
Yeah, for 3 models.
Is that all?
Yeah.
That's a lot. That's a lot.
Just a friendly 22.
And you know what, if you need rend because Cruel Boys has a lot of mortal wounds, but put make Gut Rippers rend -3, or whether the Hobgrot, the Slitters, give them ridiculous rend, or really make a cheap throwaway unit, potent with a +1 hit or a +1 to hit on 2s or wound on 2s or rend 3. You probably can trade up pretty quickly with those Slitters.
Well, one of my favorite little units is actually the Mega Boss, who can make his rend even better and really push through that sweet 6 damage through.
Yeah. No.
I know you're not a fan of that one.
Yeah, no. Look, the Mega Boss with Destroyer Artifact just trades up so well. It trades up incredibly well, and while you probably don't want to go 1-drop, getting the extra artifact, whether it is the ward on the Wargog Prophet, getting the artifact of Destroyer. There's a lot of good artifact choices, as you've said. You've obviously got mount traits as well, which is pretty neat. But what I might do, if you don't mind, we kind of move to these new units. So this is in the Dawnbringers book, but it's also on the Games Workshop website, where they have released these rules as a free PDF. So I think there's 6 new units, or 7 new units, plus a update to the Ard Boys War Scroll, because they've got a new sculpt, but they have fundamentally changed. So if you want a much more in-depth discussion on these new units, I would recommend checking out the latest discussion I had from an Ironjawz perspective. So I had Scooter Walters go through this. We spent a fair amount of time, so go check this out. But Austin, what I might do for instead of spending 10 years on these new War Scrolls, is give me a do you like it? Do you not like it? As a big WoW player, and maybe tell me why you like it or you don't like it in its current iteration. No FAQs, no points adjustments, hot off the shelf. What do you think of the Tusk Boss on More Grunter?
I'm going to say it's a big no from me, Chief.
Why?
380 points for a precious leader slot, and it's a leader slot that I can't really give any Ironjawz enhancements to, because he's not a Mega Boss, he's not a wizard. Yeah, kind of mid. And having to babysit his momentum is just kind of hard to do if I'm playing Big War. Might work better in Ironjawz itself, but yeah, I don't know. It doesn't really work for me, in my opinion.
I like the 3-up save and I like the 14 wounds. I do like some of the weapon profiles. I think there's some good stuff in there.
Yeah.
The monstrous rampage, I think, is quite an interesting one. Carve the path, but to your point, 380 is an expensive allocation. This could be, yeah, like am I going to spend 400 points essentially? It's hard to justify.
It's a lot of points for something that's hard to work with at least in a big war army. What I will say, just and this goes for all the pigs at least, is their combat output isn't reliant on a war chanter, which most Iron Jaws is. So I think that can be a really nice thing to have. Trying to be positive here. Nice thing to have is to have an Iron Jaws unit that can just rely on itself. It doesn't need a buff as well. It doesn't rely on a buff, I guess I should say.
And that's where I was going to go with, even though I'm currently a no for you on the Tusk boss on More Grunter, the fact that it's a 3-up save, 14 wounds, it can be its own beast. Finest Hour, Mystic Shield, all at defense. You can soak up, pin, and really annoy your opponent. But it is a lot of points to do so. And what are you trading off to get that? It's almost borderline a Maw Crusher.
And that's where I'd go like why? Maybe I should just take a Maw Crusher instead, though.
That's
it's
literally
gonna hit
my
harder.
point.
It's more mobile. It's more tankier.
As you said, you can issue multiple commands from it.
It doesn't offer much.
Yeah, I mean, things might change, points might change, rules might change, things might change, but right now I wouldn't be gutting my list for 400-point model.
Yeah.
Unless, you loved it.
Well, if you want to run it, go for it.
You do you. Like, we're talking at this from a very competitive point of view. There are two other builds. The other one is a Maw Grunter with the Hacken crew. So it is a 4-up save. It still has the same type of wounds. It is almost 100 points cheaper, which is crazy. You still keep the monstrous rampage. It still has the momentum and a lot of the other rules. It lost the reroll charges for Maw Grunters if you make a charge. So it's mostly what we just saw, just slightly different. At 270 for a 4-up save, does this tickle your fancy?
Nah. Again, it's a lot of points for one unit. That doesn't. I just don't really see it performing that much. Like for the same points, I could take 10 brutes. They might not be as fast, but they're going to be a lot more output. Twice the wounds on the same save. Yeah, I just don't really. It's just too many points for what it can really do.
If since points keep coming up and we haven't shown you the third version, but is there a point where this would be introduced into your list? Like if this was down to like 230, 240, does that change your mind, or is it at a point of ridiculousness where we know it's never going to be like 150, so let's not even bother?
It can depend, but it's kind of competing with the other two pigs, where one's tankier and helps the other Maw Grunters out more, and the other one's just much cheaper, and yeah, you can field more of them. It doesn't even feel like a battle line slot if you take the other guy as a general. Yeah, I just don't think this is it.
All right, so I'm hearing it's a hard no, and
Yeah.
people might agree or disagree, but right now I think why we're saying no here is because it's not adding anything to your army, and it's not filling a void that you needed filled. It is a wound sink. It is like 14 wounds or 12 wounds. And that can be like a missile. Again, that could be something on the flank. It pins. It goes on to objectives. I will say, like, I do like the idea of carve the path, right? Especially in this current meta where you might have a bunch of 1 wound or 2 wound idiots who are protecting your castle of wizards and support troops. Being able to like charge through them and then get into the juicy stuff can be nice. But as Scooter and I talked about in the previous discussion, there's a lot of sequence pieces that you need to do to get to that point. And is it worth it? Maybe, probably not.
The thing is that all their monster actions are very reliant on their momentum. And in Big War, because it's too hard to really build the momentum easily in Big War, whereas if you play Iron Jaws and you play Iron Suns, it's easier to build up because you've got the counter charge. But yeah, I think it's just a lot of points you kind of have to babysit and hope you roll high for your momentum.
Yeah, and the momentum. If people haven't read it properly, so you get you start off with one, and then you generate additional momentum from a run or a charge. But then every turn, so as it currently rules both your turn and my turn, it drops one momentum. So unless you're spiking on a 3, then you hit a charge, and you can keep somewhere around the 4 to 5 mark. You are probably going to find it's hard to get to generate momentum or to get the consistency you want for paying the 300 odd points for the Morgrunter. As cool as it is.
Yeah.
As cool as it is. The third and final version of the Piggy, and then we have other units, is the Gouger, so the Morgrunter Gouger. So it has a few less wounds. It is not a hero, and it's not elite. It's 180 points, so a lot cheaper. It doesn't have that carve the path rule, but it does have a monstrous rampage that lets you apply strike last on a unit with a wounds characteristic of 1 or 2.
Now, I think this is much more reasonable in a Big War army. I probably still prefer Gore-Grunters over this, but 180 points for a monster, which is access to Raw, and he has some access to a fight last. Hard to pull off, but it's still there at least. It's much more reasonable. And again, it's an Iron Jaws unit that isn't too reliant on a War Chanter to boost the damage output. I actually think the Gorges are quite good in a Big War army.
So talk me through the decision-making process. So you mentioned your Gore-Grunters versus a Gouger, right?
Yeah.
So what's the pros and cons here if I'm thinking about switching out my Gore-Grunters for this?
Well, I think they play different roles, in my opinion. I think if I was running like 2 units of Gore-Grunters, for instance, I'd probably drop 1 unit for one of these guys. I like Gore-Grunters to be the turn 1, go and remove something and tie up my opponent for a little bit, even if it's just for a turn. You probably aren't going to do that with your Gorges, but you're probably just going to have them run in the back line, just build that momentum up. But having 180 points for a cheap monster that can go support your units, like go and raw this unit or make them fight last, I think can be a really good utility. And it's a hard hitting unit where I don't have to put Violent Fury on them. I can put that on the Brutes. I can put that somewhere else, and still be like, okay, this unit's got good damage. Again, like I wouldn't replace Gore-Grunters with this guy to do that turn 1 job, but if I was going to run 2 Gore-Grunters, I probably would consider just dropping 1 for one of these guys.
Something that might be worth mentioning is the Mighty Tusk. So you'll see the asterisk there, right? So move, Mighty Tusk, and the trample. There's a couple of little asterisks. So with your Mighty Tusks, for example, depending on where your momentum score is, it's either D3 damage, D3 plus 1, D3 plus 2, or D3 plus 3. So on 2, 3, 3s, Ren minus 3, for you, Austin, if you're getting up to that +1 to hit and +1 to wound, now it's 2 2s, Ren minus 3, potentially D3 plus 2 or D3 plus 3 damage without calling the War. That could be pretty brutal for 180 points.
Yeah, but it's very solid to have. And if you really want to boost that damage further, you can. It's an Iron Jaws unit. Just give them that +1 damage on top of that.
I will say there is one big trade-off that neither of us acknowledged just yet, and that is when you have your Gore-Grunters, they do mortal wounds on the charge. None of these Morgrunters do mortals on the charge, so you lose those impact hits.
Agreed, but like 3, maybe more prevalent on a unit of 6 gore runners, but 3 gore runners at most do 3 mortal wounds.
Yeah.
It's not a huge, like, it probably helps their damage output more than the big pigs, but it's not the biggest thing in the world.
No, I'm just calling out one of the key changes. And in an Ironjaw's army, those mortal wounds are probably more valued. But considering you have, let's say, for example, the Wargog Prophet, who is just a gold mine of mortal wounds, it's a trade-off that you're willing to spend, as opposed to an Ironjaw's, where like they need as many mortals as possible because they just don't have many. They're high rend, but not a lot of high mortals.
For sure, yeah.
Anything else on our piggy? So I'm hearing of the 3 piggy variants, you think the more grunted gouger probably better suits you because of the price point, because of the role, and some of the rules that it brings to the table without overpaying for the other stuff that you just don't need.
I think it might be worth mentioning that despite being monsters themselves, they don't have a bracket table.
Mm.
So the more damage they take, they're not going to get worse. They're going to still remain efficient. They're more just entirely reliant on that momentum mechanic. Oh, where did you go?
I pressed back. I apologize there, folks. Really quick.
Almost made it my show again.
I pressed the mouse button. Actually, the book actually pressed the mouse button.
Yeah, blame it on the book.
I actually did. I closed the mouse, then the mouse right click went backwards. But you
But yeah. So just having a monster that doesn't bracket and has pretty good damage is really nice to have.
Yeah, I was literally trying to bring up the war scroll to make sure I just triple check the bracketing piece, but it's very much based around the momentum score.
Yeah.
What about some of the other troops? Right, you got Zorog, the Anvil Smasher, 160 point. It's a unique hero tied to Iron Sons, but you don't care about that because you don't get the Ironjaw sub allegiance anyway, so that's irrelevant to you. But for us, like I know in the previous conversation, the power of the great green god ability is really appreciated and quite a nice little rule.
So I think this is a really fun hero to start with. But again, he's kind of competing. Something that should be mentioned in Big War is you're often going to have 5 to 6 leaders, with some of them just being auto includes. There's no negotiating it. You just have to take some of these guys. And I think my issue is he's competing with a war chanter for me.
Mm.
And it's like, what's better? A chance of doing some mortal wounds with 30 attacks, so 5 mortal wounds, or just a flat out +1 damage across everything. And I think most of the time the extra damage is gonna help out more. I can maybe see taking him if you took a big unit of Ardboys, for instance. But yeah. If you really need mortal wounds, you have Kruleboyz you can take. You have options. I just don't think he's it.
And I think that's the difference between an Ironjaws player and a Big War player, is
Yeah.
because again, Ironjaws don't have a lot of sources of mortal wounds. They can't get the venom encrusted weapons from the Kruleboyz. They can't get the Wargog Prophet, so they lack the mortal wounds, and this becomes an attractive, especially if you're running Iron Sons. But for you, you don't need it. It's not something, and if you wanted it, you would look for more consistent sources through the army. As you mentioned, the Boltboyz is a perfect example, or the Wargog Prophet.
Or even like Gut Rippers with a Shaman or a Sludge Ray. You have a lot of options, and I just don't think he's worth taking at his points in. Well, I even say point. I just don't think he's worth taking in Big War in general.
And because of the role as well, you've already got too many heroes in your army
Yeah,
as it is. You've got a lot of cheap heroes too that you can customize.
but you know what? He's great in Iron Jaws though, at least.
If you were going to run your Ardboys, would you consider an Ardboy big boss?
If I was running a lot of Ardboys, absolutely. because the rally's just too good to not have. But again, it's another hero where I'm going to take a lot of heroes already, and for him to work, I need to take a lot of Ard boys. And if I'm doing that, I don't have much. So he's definitely going to be a miss for me. And he
100-point
doesn't really
hero.
like solid hero again in Nine Jaws, but Big War is a bit tricky. He doesn't do enough if you take 10 Ard boys. And if you're taking 20 Ard boys, it's a big sink in points already.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, the fact that you can issue rally twice to Ardboy units, which is great,
Yeah.
and you get the 5-up rally instead of the 6-up becomes really good. But to your point, 2 units of 10 Ardboys, we're at 440. At this leader, it's 540. That's 1/4 of your army going into that block. Some people might go, yay, that's worth the investment. For
Yeah.
others, they go, it's not giving me enough tools. If I add Gobsprak, if I add, some Bolt Boys, if I add the Got Profit, I add some piggies and various other units, it could be too much for your points allocation.
Yeah. He's just going to be too hard to really fit in my opinion. Maybe if Ard boys were a little cheaper, but as of now, it's too many points to really make him worthwhile.
Yeah, no, and it is competing a little bit with the Mega Boss, which I know
Yeah.
you've got in your list, and its rules aren't better than the Mega Boss.
And once again, he can't take any enhancements from Iron Jaws as well. So you can't even give him Destroyer. He can't take a command trait outside of the generic ones. So
No, because there's
yeah,
no Mega Boss keyword, so you take your
exactly.
Arcane Tome or something generic, but nothing for you. All right, Ard Boys. We talked a lot about them. They went up from 80 points for 5 to 220 points for 10. You got other things and other changes, right? A couple of example is that everyone now has a shield as opposed to a couple in every
That is so
X.
appreciated.
Um,
That was
but
hard to
all,
math out sometimes.
it can be annoying. Some other things as well is you did lose your musician, so you don't get the +1 to charge.
Mhm.
Do you like these? And if you were going to build them, are you going to go with the choppers or the stickers?
So I do like them. Um, I'd probably again, as I said earlier, I'd probably at most just take 10,
Hmm.
and I'm just gonna give them choppers because you tell you what, +1 attack on the charge is really nice. Um, but the interesting word to that is if they made a charge move in the same turn, which means if you hero phase charge them, they're still getting +1 attack from the chopper at least. Um, and 10 guys, it's actually not the hardest thing to get all 10 in if you honeycomb them. I have a lot of experience playing squigs. So they can actually be like they're already a fairly tanky unit with a 3-up save, which is a new improvement.
Hmm.
But having 31 attacks that can become 2s and 2s, another improvement from the old R boys. Put a +1 damage on them. They can slap. They can slap pretty hard.
And you could put Hoarfrost on them to get them at Ren -3 if you wanted to.
Yeah. Or maybe you don't have your +1 to wound yet, but you got your +1 to hit. Oh, it can boost the ability to wound.
Hmm.
And 3-up save. Let's put a Mystic Shield. Let's all out defense them. This is a pretty tanky unit now, which you never really had before in Big War, I don't think.
And not specifically in Iron Jaws, I know it's all hammers, very little to no anvils.
Yeah,
This is something if you are going to run like a unit of Bolt Boys, or if you're going to run something you're trying to protect your backfield, or a bunch of heroes like War Chanters and things from the back, you need something durable, and this is it. This is going
yeah,
to be a lot more durable than you ever had. Otherwise, you were just flooding the board with cheap screens you didn't care about that would die, but it was just wounds and tying people up until they got you to that point.
yep. And again, it's a tanky unit, but it's one that can also go out and fight. They can
Mm.
do a lot of damage if you need to clear out some lightly armored guys. think these guys do something like 44 damage on average with all the buffs.
With +1 hit, +1 to wound.
Yeah, and +1 damage. Like, they're pretty insane.
Yeah, yeah, and that's a great like second or third wave, right? Like if you've got some boar boys or some gore grunters that have gone out or other things obviously, but you got that
Yeah.
first wave. You might have some shooting units like the bolt boys in the back for that second wave. This is that like very rarely are these units going to go into a maximum strength unit. You've already chipped them down, you've damaged them, and the sheer weight of dice, especially the consistency, getting them on 2s and 2s through the war at 20 war points, it's pretty dangerous.
Yeah, they're don't count these guys out. They're very good.
So you like them, but you wouldn't overcommit to them. So a unit of 10, maybe 2 units of 10 at most, but
Yeah.
really
And I
like
think
you wouldn't be doing too many units.
and I think if you go into one big unit, you'd probably start giving them stickers as well, as opposed to choppers.
Big unit
But
as in 20.
yeah, if you take 20, you'll probably just give them stickers.
Oh yeah. You want the 2-inch range because you just lose too many attacks if you reinforce the unit.
Yeah, shield bash, it's nice. But yeah.
Brute rages. This is going to be probably the easiest conversation we're going to have. 100 points, 3 wounds each, 5 up save. You can equip them with either 3 different weapon options. They can run and charge. Do you like them, Austin? And how many boxes do I need to order?
You want to start with 12 boxes, I reckon.
Dear Lord. 100. By the way, there's no battle line options for these, so they cannot be battle line whatsoever. There's no general if does this. No, they're not battle line. So, what do you like about the brute rages?
So I mentioned previously that one of the big downsides to Iron Jaws with their infantry specifically is they're very slow. They're 4-inch moving. They're very reliant on Mighty Destroyers to get them going. This unit can potentially, you can guarantee this unit move 14 inches for a 9 Jaws infantry unit before charges. That's pretty insane. And
And
you're
just to
still going to get them
clarify,
to charge.
how do you do that? Just to connect the dots.
So 4-inch movement, you Mighty Destroyers for another 4-inch movement, and you can just auto run them 6 inches. And 14-inch move, and then you can charge them afterwards.
Because Mighty Destroyers, you can still move after it, right? That doesn't count as a move.
Well, you do that in the hero phase, and then you
Yeah.
normal move.
Yeah, so it's 4 + 4 + 4 and the run.
Oh, +6 with the run. Sorry.
Yeah, then either you roll the dice or you. Okay, that I just want to connect the dots. So 4, 4, 4
Yeah.
plus dice roll or 6.
So you get a very mobile infantry unit. Some of the weapons look a bit mid with 4s and 4s, but in Big War, just remember +1 to hit and wound. They're quite solid. They're elite as well, which again you don't need a hero near them, so that's quite handy to have. And they're all 2-inch range weapons. So I know we brought up coherency earlier, and where these guys are a unit of 3, you can reinforce them to be 6. It's not a big deal because of the 2-inch range weapons. You'll probably have them in 2 ranks regardless, and it's a very small footprint that you can charge into, like it may be a small area, and still get the entire efficiency of the unit. Whereas maybe 10 brutes or 10 ard boys might struggle to really get all their attacks in.
How are you going to equip them?
So I'm gonna say it's a big no for Brute Crusher.
No. Oh, the brute crusher. Sorry, the brute
Yeah.
crusher. They're saying the brute rages. I'm like, whoa.
Oh no.
I'm like, whoa. Wait a second. No. So why no brute crusher? Because again, my Iron Jaws chat, it was like this one every day of the week because you get the 3 mortal wounds.
So I think the 3 mortal wounds is nice, and if you take 6 of these guys, you're averaging 9 mortal wounds. I'm not gonna say it's nothing to scoff at, but again, if you want mortal wounds, you've got Cruel Boys, you got a Wergog. And the problem is if you don't roll the mortal wounds, it's not many attacks you're gonna be rolling here. It's 9 to 18 depending on your unit size. And if you're not getting those sixes, you're following it up with 3s and 3s at best. Rend 1, D3 damage. It's just to me. If it threw more attacks, I think in Big Y I'd definitely consider it, but at the moment I'm a bit hesitant. It's just not enough for me.
Would you say the Mighty Gore Hackers is your choice?
I'd actually say the Chain Smasher is my choice.
Really? I would have assumed because of the 3/3 Ren 2 for 2, especially when you bring that down to 2s and 2s, that's a super consistent profile.
It is. And I might take it for a smaller unit. But 6 of these guys with Chain Smashers roll 36 attacks at 3s and 3s. If you want to make it better beyond that, let's cast Hoarfrost. They're hitting on 2s. Or let's improve their rend. It's just a lot of attacks for a very cheap cost. And the best part, with both Chain Smasher and Mighty Gore Hacker, it's all damage too. So the biggest advantage is it's another unit that's not relying on a War Chanter. You don't have to, like that. Yeah, you can put that Violent Fury somewhere else, maybe on the 5 or 10 Brutes or the Gore Grunters. These guys can operate on their own. But if you need them to do damage, 36 attacks, 3s, 3s, rend 1, 3 damage. That's quite terrifying.
I guess the question is, do you need volume or do you need rend? And obviously, there's a lot of things in play here, right? We talk about Hoarfrost, so you could Hoarfrost the rend, you could Hoarfrost the hit roll. So there's a lot of things you can do here. But if you're worrying about going into, let's say, a zombie meta or a goblin meta where you just need to clear out big blocks, Chain Smasher, love it. But if you're dealing with something a lot more heavy armored, maybe you're not putting these straight into your Necropolis Stalkers or your Mortis Guard, but like the Gore Hackers will still do some good damage to some good armor save troops.
That is true, but the cheapest battle line in Big War right now is Brutes, and Brutes carry that Rend 2 into the game. So if you're worried about the Rend of these guys, take Brutes. Or if you're really worried about armor, take some Cruel Boys for some mortal wounds. And even against high armored units, it's so much attack. It's so many attacks. It's still gonna do some work. It might not be as strong as a Gore Hacker, but it's actually not like mathematically that far off. And you might even want to throw in some tools to maybe negate some of these higher saves, maybe like an all-out defense, for example.
So what you value is the volume of attacks, and yeah, you can definitely bring it down to 3s and 3s, which does make it a lot more consistent.
Yeah.
But you're thinking about this like, how do I clear out lots of bodies that have low, super average armor saves and just do an incredible amount of damage?
Yeah, I think I just find with Chain Smashers, it's just good against everything. And if you run up against like a high armored safe army like OBR and they've stacked the saves anyway, what's a Rend 2 Gore Hacker gonna do? Like if they're negating 2 Rend, I might as well just have more attacks.
Well, if you're building this specifically to handle OBR, then you're going the Brute Crusher, right? Just to get the mortal wounds. But then that goes back to your argument of the Venom encrusted weapons and the many other different sources of mortals. So is this the right tool? So
for me, I don't think you can go wrong with Mighty Gore Hackers. But I think Chain Smashers are just the most adaptable. It's just kind of good against everything.
I'm not trying to disagree with you. I think it just depends on. I think for me it depends on what's the role that I need this to play, and where is it most likely going to be attacking? Is it trying to clear out screens so then your good stuff can go into like the juicy center, like your pickies? Is it something that you want to get into high armored? I think it depends on really how you envision this working. I see your argument on Chain Smasher. Agreed. And I think this is the difference again between Iron Jaws and Big War and what you value because what you've got on your roster.
For sure, like I can see all these weapons being used in like an Iron Jaws army, whereas
What
I'm
about
more
this one?
about efficiency.
Yeah. What about the Weird Brute? Because it only comes with the Chain Smasher. It is a little bit more points at 125 for 3, but you are getting the 5-up ward when it's within 3 inches of combat. And you're also getting the unmodified 6s to hit in a unit of 10 or more models. Will get a extra hit for every 6. So you get the exploding 6s. So given you are high on the Chain Smasher on the Brute Rages, would you pay the extra 25 points to go into a Weird Brute Wrecker instead?
So when I first saw this War Scroll, I don't really get why you'd ever take these guys. But I think the more I thought about it, it's like, you know what? Like, if you're running into big hordes, this is even more efficient while still being, as I said, equipped with my favorite weapon. It's still going to be good regardless, but it's even better against those big units. You're still going to get your run and charge. And the 5+ ward can actually maybe help with more decision making with like choosing who you're going to activate first, because the 5-up ward's going to make them just that little bit tankier. Or maybe you want to charge into a shooting unit. 5-up ward's going to activate because they're within 3 of a shooting unit. Oh, they're at least within 3 of a unit. So you're not going to take as many losses compared to rages. I don't think I'd take these guys over rages, but if I have the spare points, I would upgrade rages to these guys for sure.
Yeah, for someone like you, so like when I looked at this for the first time, I'm like I didn't value the Chain Smasher in my lists as much as you do. So
Yeah.
because I wasn't valuing it, I'm like, well, then the only thing I'm really seeing here is a 5-up ward, which for 25 points, and I have to be within 3 inches, is too conditional to pay the extra points. I'd rather not pay that and have a
Yeah.
better chance of getting the triumph. But if you're going into the hordes, if that's something that you want to do, and Chain Smasher is valued, yeah, I see the benefit in Big War because again, you're playing in the volume game. You get the +1 to hit, +1 to wound from the Big War points, and
Yeah, like the 5-up ward, it's going to be a unit that might consistently stay in combat. That's going to be war points you're racking up. And again, it's still got all the good benefits from rages. It's still elite. They're still running and charging, and they look cool on top of that.
and if you pop the Big War, the 24 points with the exploding 6s, so that'd be 3 damage each, generating a couple of extra attacks. What's that? I mean,
and
it's just
it,
a
and
lot of damage to a horde unit.
and if you even think about it, like you look at zombies and maybe even flagellants that are upcoming, or maybe you're playing a big Khorne mortal horde, where they die and you take damage back, you have a ward save to at least negate some of that coming back at you.
Yeah, I
I think
like
there
that.
is value. There's a lot of
Yeah,
value to this unit.
yeah, I see the argument. I think there's just not a lot of, for me, there's just not a lot of 10-unit troops running around. And the type of things you're fighting into at the moment seem to be a lot more minimum size units or units of 6s. But again, like for those smaller size units with lots of wounds and a better armor save, you've got other tools to handle that. What
Yeah.
you need to handle is, as you said, the squig herd, the zombies, the flagellants, there's the horde of troops that you don't want to put 6 piggies into or 3 piggies into in the case that you've talked about in the past, where 3 piggies just won't do enough.
And I mean, like, Cities is coming out, and all their infantry are 10 models or more. Like, this unit, you could charge 2 units with this one unit and probably just crump both of them.
Just got to handle the 5-up ward from the Warforger. Oh, sorry, not Warforger. Sorry, the Pope, the Pontifex.
Don't worry about her.
Let's keep calling it Pope. Yeah, because no one's gonna run the Pope at all. It's
I,
not going to
I
be
actually
running.
call her my Pontifex tax because I need her to make flagellants work.
Yeah, you're talking to Austin and I, who both run flagellants. We're in a race of who can own the most flagellants and have them painted. So, with that in mind, and there's a lot of things we can unpack here. I thought the easiest way to describe this, because I was going to ask you like, what's your favorite command traits and what are your favorite units, but like this can be all summarized in your army list.
Yep.
So Austin has provided two army lists that we'll kind of talk through. I'll talk about what it is, and then you can tell me how it works and what does it do, and like just give me like in your head what this thing is meant to do and the combinations and all the good stuff that maybe you don't pick up on first glance. So it is a big WAR list. The grand strategy is WAR, and your triumph is a inspired, but doesn't matter because you are 2k on the nose. You have Gobsprak, you have a Auric War Chanter at 120 with a fix and beat. I don't know why I said the points just then. You have another Auric War Chanter with the get and beat. So you've got fix and beat and get and beat in two different ones. You have a Weird Knob Shaman, which is your general, with the command trait of Shaman of the Chilled Lands, which is General's Handbook, knows all the three spells from the GBH. And you also know the Great Big Green Hand of Gork. You got yourself a Wargog Prophet with the glowing tattoos and the spell Hoarfrost. You also have a Mega Boss with the Destroyer artifact. You have a unit of 10 Brutes. You have a unit of 10 Brutes. You have a unit of Ard
2 units
Boys.
of 5 brutes.
Pardon?
2 units of 5 brutes.
Are there fives, are they?
Yeah.
Thank you. Then the numbers didn't come over. So 2 units of 5 Brutes, a unit of Ard Boys, a unit of Gore Grunters, 2 units of the Brute Ragers, and the Geminids of Ulgish. 2k on the nose, and as I mentioned, you have Warlord, Antorian Acolytes, Wizard Finders of Antor, and the Iron Jaws Fist. So you got 4 battalions. So what does it do? How does it work? Combinations? What do I need to know?
So it plays pretty much to how I love to play Big War, which is a lot of board presence, a lot of board control, and I've even actually thrown in some ways to help me control the combat activations. So we talked about Wergog Prophet. We know what he does. He's actually interestingly pretty solid in this season because not only is he hard to shoot, but on the wizard side of things, he's got a Horde Breaker spell. At first glance, it doesn't seem good. It's casting value 5, pick an enemy unit within 24, and every 6 is a mortal wound. It's alright. But on a 10 plus, every 4 plus is a mortal wound. But not a modified 10 plus. But not an unmodified 10 plus. So if you're running into hordes, you actually have a really good long range horde clearing spell just on him alone. That's really easy to get off because of primal dice. And then he's a 2-cast wizard, so you know what? Go ahead and cast Hoarfrost. Go ahead and cast Mystic Shield on top of that. So I really like him for that, and I like the Weird Knob Shaman. I used to give him Master of Magic all the time, just to make the teleport more reliable, and maybe a solid unbind here and there. But with Shaman of the Chilled Lands, I effectively turn him into a discount Wergog Prophet, where he's got this 12-inch aura of, yep, don't come near me or I'm going to blizzard you. It was a bit better because you could Mighty Destroys and then blizzard, but the change to blizzards changed for the better. But it's still pretty nice to have a big aura of don't come near me. And you know what? If the Wergog does his staring and you need Hoarfrost, he's got Hoarfrost. And you've got the big play with the big great green hand of Gork, which is great. And if you need him to score your Grand Strat, you can just teleport him into enemy territory and it's easy done. He's a very safe general to have, which is important in a big war army. If you lose him, that's a lot of war points down the drain. War Chanters, we know him, we love him. +1 damage. It's great. I take 2, just if I lose one, I'm not going to lose some war points. It's really efficient. And the fix and beat's great when it comes to the Wergog Prophet. I can just heal him up and get him ready for the next stare.
Go on.
And Get and Beat's really nice to just get a 3d6 charge potentially. Fails half the time though. But yeah, just send a unit flying across the table.
Gobsprak, though, that's the one that I want to talk about here because Gobsprak is one of those units that always sounded good on paper, that it always got dropped from people's list for whatever reason. And Gobsprak has just been getting discounted and discounted and discounted. And in the current meta as well, which is Magic, between the points discounts and the rules,
Yeah.
it's a great time to take Gobsprak.
For those that don't know, Gobsprak, when he unbinds a spell from a wizard, he does D3 mortal wounds to that wizard. But if you unbinds it on a 10 plus, not unmodified, they take D6 mortal wounds instead. And he also has a once per battle 3d6 cast, which is nice. But with primal dice in the mix, and I think this season, I think undisputedly favors the unbind than the caster. Yeah, and there's a lot of wizards going around, so he's gonna hurt them.
And
I
it's
think,
also a two caster, right?
and he's a 2 caster, so he's got 2 unbinds as well. First game of Sydney GT, he just killed a wizard casting spells.
Because you can primal magic dice the unbind, which then puts you on the 10 plus, or even if you don't, even if it was like a 9, that spellcaster is still going to take D3 mortal wounds. Your wizards might think twice before trying to cast a spell when Gobsprak's around. Then if you chuck down your primal magic dice and get that 10 or more, sit on arcane as well for a +1, yada yada yada. That could pop a wizard completely. There's D6 mortal wounds, so on a 5 or a 6, you are really popping down those minor heroes with a spell, which is brutal.
And to add to that, he's an orc wizard in Big War, so he's going to benefit from +1 to all of his magic anyway. That +1 to unbind, like as I said, if you roll a 9, +1, 10 D6 mortal wounds to you, sir.
And you said Gobsprak as well knows all the spell lore, so you'll know Nasty
Yeah.
X, you'll know the Cloud, the
Choking Mist, yes.
Choking Mist. I was going to call it Big Fart or something. Like
You've
it's
got the Black Pit. If you need another Horde Breaker, like he's just such an adaptable wizard to have. And combat-wise, he's fine. You might send him off to kill something cheap, but his big power is denying that magic and his own spell lore. So yeah. I love Gobsprak.
For 240, it's a very good value.
It's
very good value. Yeah.
And he's my only Cruel Boys unit in the army, so it's going to be extremely easy for me just to score that Cruel Boys battle tactic. All I have to do is not send him into combat.
No, like turn 1, sit it on terrain, especially like if it's arcane terrain, just keep it within 3 inches of the terrain, and you've scored that battle tactic. Turn 1, no risk, literally no risk. There's nothing my opponent can do to stop me from scoring that.
Yeah, exactly. And I think Mega Boss with some of these new units I actually think is elevated now, more elevated than before. So what Destroy does is once per battle, you get to add +3 to his damage. So he goes from damage 2 to damage 5. If you want to add to that, Violent Fury, it's another +1 damage. And he has an ability where if he dies in the combat phase before he fights, he can fight on death. So he's a really good trade piece if you really need him. But before he even does that, he's a really great commander because he can issue 2 commands for 1 command point to 2 Ironjaw units in any phase. So it's really good. And he's a totem on top of that. So he's got a big 18-inch range for that command. And why I think he's so good now, or even better, I should say, is with the new Brute Rages and Wreckers. The units that can run and charge. Because why? What if I just spend the command point to, what's it called, Forward to Victory, or where you just add 6 to the movement?
Oh, yeah. You Forward to Victory. Yeah,
you just do that you do that twice on both your running and charging units, or even a big pig if he's got that momentum. Like, that's a lot of value. That's a lot of movement you're going to get out of just a single command point.
And you can obviously, like one person could redeploy. Cool, you've still got another one that can do it. and get in and make a cheeky charge very easily.
Yeah, or I need to hold, so my hard boys are going to all out defense. Oh, my brutes are being attacked. I'll just do that there as well. Why not? Or early on, if maybe someone hits you first, I've got 2 all-out attacks in my back pocket. Oh, I need to re-roll another chart. He's extremely good value for 140 points. He's my boy. Brutes are there just to give me some just extra rent. They're red too. They can be extremely consistent and very good value for 140 points, but they are relying on those war chanters. We talked about Ardboys. They're very tanky, and they're a very good unit in combat on top of that. And as I said, there's the funny trick where you can charge them in the hero phase, and they'll still benefit from +1 attack later on. Gorgrunners will just do their turn 1 job, and then we obviously have 2 units of Rages, 6-man units.
If this discussion was, let's say, 4 weeks ago, would you still have as many brutes? Like, are brutes now filling in your slot for Ardboys, or have you always run a couple of units of brutes and the Ardboys have been taken up by other things?
Well, I usually ran like a unit of 10 brutes and maybe another little unit of 5. But I know my GT list had like that amount of brutes and like 3 units of 5 Ardboys on top of that. Because I like to use Ardboys a lot just to disrupt my opponent with Mighty Destroyers, charge them in the hero phase, and deny those redeploys and inspiring. What's it called? Unleash Hell. And with that +1 to charge, it built into the War Scroll is pretty reliable too. Bit harder to rely on now.
Yeah, I was more thinking like if I'm a Big Quad player or an Ironjawz player right now, and I've always been running my Ardboys, and now I'm like, holy smokes, they've just literally more than doubled in my list. I'm now over my points. What's the swap here, or however you like manipulated your list with these no longer 80-point Ardboys, because you still do have a unit of 220 and you found the points from somewhere else. I know there's been lists that you've run where you've had one of the Underworlds warbands in there for a couple of different, cheap units. You used to run Bone Splitter Piggies, and they've got some interesting shenanigans too.
Yeah, if you still want, you're obviously going to have a battle line problem now, so it's probably best to invest in some brutes. But if you want some really cheap Ironjawz units, you can always run Iron Skull Boys. You can always run Wargox Crushers. They're suitable enough to replace the Ardboys, at least the old ones. Or if you really want like a big screen, like there's nothing wrong with allying some Goblin Shooters or Stabbers. It's a lot of wounds for 20 points. It's better than Hobgrots, to be honest.
Yeah, poor old Slitters.
Yeah. But the one thing I want to talk about is Geminids. So Geminids has a very cool ability where when it moves over a unit or finishes a move near a unit, you roll a dice, and on a 2+, they cannot issue or receive commands until the end of the turn.
Yes.
What I find really interesting is that there's a little trick with Mighty Destroyers, and very rarely do I ever pull it off. When you charge in the hero phase, you can retreat in your movement phase, but because you've made a charge move, you can proceed to pile back into the combat phase. Yep, because all you have to do is make a charge move in the turn and you can pile in.
Right. Yeah, go on, keep talking.
But there has one big fatal flaw.
Yes.
Is that you can just redeploy away.
Yes.
So if you use Geminids to say deny you from redeploying, I can charge my guys in, retreat them back out, and then rather than you hitting me if I'm activating elsewhere, I can hit you over here, and they go, okay, these guys will pile back in, and I'm going to hit you before you hit me. And I'm going to pile these guys back in, I'm going to hit you again. So you kind of get this quasi smashing and bashing out of it.
Did you not just say you rarely hit it though?
Well, I rarely hit it though.
You rarely pull this off.
before I ran Geminids.
So the Geminids has become an anchor point for you to be able
Yeah.
to do that.
Before, like, I've done it before against a Gargant, but it was pinned in by some impassable terrain and a big unit of Ardboys, so it couldn't redeploy. Or recently, someone's stuck in a garrison, so they can't redeploy.
Some cheeky jank you got there. I'll need
Yeah.
to check the tapes to make sure that it sounds legit, and I'm sure people will whinge at me in the comment section if there is a one word that says that you can't do that. But it does that does sound interesting, and yeah, I like it. If it works the way that you're talking about it, I like it.
Yeah. Pretty sure it does, though.
I'm pulling up the rules as we speak. I'm like, anyway, keep going. Keep going.
That kind of covers
That's
it
it.
for me. Like, we got
All right.
all the little power pairs, all the little jobs that these guys pull.
Cool. All right, I'm going to move to the second one. I'm looking up the exact wording and piling in. I need to see if this is legit or not, because otherwise I'll get in trouble and people will get crying at me and like they'll be, you can't do this. You made
So we'll find here I've got pretty much the exact same hero core. It's just what I'm very comfortable running at the moment. I have so much practice with it. Same battalions. You don't have to take wizard finders. I just like it in case if I run up against a wizard monster and Mega Boss is going to do his thing, I might as well just take a +1 attack out of it. Yes,
So
coach.
just to interrupt, sir, I found the rule. So I just wanted to clarify, just to make sure. So I'm looking at rule 12.1 in the fight sequence. Blah 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 blah. And a unit is eligible to fight if it's within 3 inches of an enemy unit, and it has not fought in that phase, or if it's made a charge move in the same turn and it has not fought in that phase. So not charge move in the phase, it's charge move in the same turn. So
Yep.
because you've charged in the hero phase, you have ticked that box. You have not fought yet, so you've ticked that box. You are eligible to make a pile in. I just want to triple check it in case there was a wording that made us not allowed to do that. So, but you are 100% correct. Keep going, my friend.
So yeah, very good little utility piece for Geminids. And as you can see, I've taken it again because why not? This
So,
one,
you know,
this is a very similar list to before. As I said, it's just something I'm more comfortable with. But I don't have my Ardboys anymore. I've replaced them for a big unit of 10 brutes.
Yeah.
So this is going to cover my maybe weakness with the Rages who might not have the Rend. I've got a big, 10 brutes that can cover that for me, and they can kill something with that's got a lot of wounds and a high save. They can do that job, and Geminids can help me out there too. I had some spare points as well, so I just took a unit 3 Rages and made them Wreckers. And I think little 3-man units of either Rages or Wreckers can be a decent substitute for Gorg Runners. Because you can give them the movement to advance way up the board and send them in to remove a piece while you're keeping your Gorg Runners around. But yeah, it's not. This list isn't too different from what I ran from the previous list.
There's a lot of commonality. You've obviously swapped out the Ardboys for more brutes. You've gained. There's obviously some minor differences there, but you've obviously, as you mentioned, you got the Wreckers, but you've still got that same core. You've got one Kruleboyz unit through Gobsprakk. You've still got your double War Chanters with the same beats. You've still got your Wargog Prophet with the glowing tattoos. So you can kind of see that like you could drop some of these things right and get those Bolt Boys in with the Shaman. You could bring in some piggies from Bone Splitters, and both your lists actually have very little Bone Splitters other than the Wargog Prophet.
Yeah.
So, like, I know there's some tech and some cheap screens you can possibly do with the what are the pigs called? The
just Ball Boys.
Ball Boys, the Ball Boys. See, there's some things you can do with Ball Boys, but I guess now you've got a bunch of extra units, and you've got some damage potential from like your. I think rages are too hard not to take. Even if you're taking them in units of 3, they become great trade pieces, incredible trade pieces.
I know I've seen some funny lists of someone running 4 units of 6 and still have like a 5 hero core.
I have seen some pretty crazy lists. I think that's way it's too much.
Yeah.
But I mean, maybe something for your next TTS game. But having a couple of like whether it's one block of 6, 2 or 3 units of 3, like 3 units of 3 is only 300 points, and that can again bring the zone denial. It can chip damage. It can pin. It can do a lot of things.
Like, yeah, even the little 3 units can almost be a replacement for those smaller units of Ard Boys used to take, with the difference being a little less tankiness, but a lot more output that they can have. A lot more independent as well.
Yes. Yeah. I was going to say, and you said as well, like if you wanted bodies, you could obviously bring in, something from the Gits. You could bring in like shooters or stabbers. Stabbers obviously great for having like being able to contest objectives within 9 inches, not 6.
Yeah.
Shooters do like 2 attacks each, so they can do some dumb damage. Or bring in some other things. Bring in like people have been loving sneaky snufflers lately, where they're cheap bodies, they're a ward save. They can just they're not buffing anyone else, but they can just be super annoying. Or even the Gobblepalooza for like double caster, and some nice little abilities as well. So there's a lot to like.
Yeah, for sure. Or you can just take your little Ironjaw warbands. We got that Cruel Boys warband coming out on pre-order this week. Like who knows what these guys are going to be like. I do want to bring up all my lists for like Ironjaws heavy, but you can absolutely take a fairly Cruel Boys heavy army, and they can do a lot of work as well.
That's literally what I was going to ask you about, because in the past when you and I have played, you've always had a much deeper Cruel Boys roster where you've had the Shaman with the Pot Grot. You've always had a unit of 6 Bolt Boys. And I've noticed both of your lists have dropped them. Is it because of the changes of Lookout Sir? Is it because like other things just need those points? Or because I imagine you still need shooting, and you need good mortal wounds that you've talked already about. You got a good core.
For sure. I just think there's been a lot of changes to Big War with how many leaders, like what kind of leaders they want to run. And one of the biggest changes has actually been the Arcane Tome change. Because I used to just take a War Chanter, slap him with an Arcane Tome. I basically got a Shaman now. But now, because I can't do that, I've had to slot a Shaman in. And because I'm so Ironjaws heavy, I want 2 War Chanters. And, you always want a Bone Splitter's Wizard. So at that point, I'm already running about 4 heroes. So I've only got 2 flex spots left. And even now, it's like, I might want to take a Cruel Boys hero that can at least help the army and score that easy battle tactic. And right now, Goldsprack's just, for me, too hard to not take. So that leaves me with 1 spot. And I'm like, yes, Shaman works if I take Bolt Boys. But can I fit Bolt Boys in now with the Ard Boy change? Bit hard. You can obviously, but it's just a bit more difficult to justify it. And now with the Lookout Sir change, they're not really sniping heroes as much as I would usually do. They still got value, of course, but now it's a bit hard to justify it. And a Shaman, well, what's he going to buff on his own? Gobsprack? Or a Mega Boss that can make sure I can really run those rages forward and guarantee just guarantee a lot of movement and have a trade piece on top of that.
I think what's really exciting, and you're right, you do have a much heavier Ironjaws focus, but the flexibility of this particular army, you could bring in Maya Brute or two. You could bring in a Sludge Draker. You could bring in, as you said, the Hobgrot Slitters. You could bring in, we really haven't touched much of the Bone Splitters at all. There's so much flexibility and variety in this army that no matter what you want to build and how you want to play, you can lean into one part of the book. I think without that Cruel Boys battle tactic, yeah, you might have more Cruel Boys in your army, but I can see why you'd want to restrict that to make it easy to score that battle tactic. But again, Gobsprakk is such a great unit right now, but
Yeah.
there's a lot of good choices that you can bring into this depending on how you want to play.
For sure. It's also for me when it comes to Cruel Boys, just because of how the meta has been with Cruel Boys, I haven't really been enticed to take more Cruel Boys. Like now, I might want to try Gut Rippers and a Sludge Raker, but I just don't have the models, so I'm not really going to play lists with them. With small models, I'm going to build and paint, and I've got other projects to work on too.
And that's coming from the city's background, like you and I have. Like there's this analysis paralysis where you go down a path, you go, cool, I'm going to add this unit of Bolt Boys. Okay, well, to support the Bolt Boys, I need this hero. Okay, if I've got this hero, then I could use this unit. And all of a sudden, your list can very quickly deviate from what you tried to build. And then you're like, oh, I sacrifice something. And then you're just in this constant circle of list building. So putting a restriction on yourself can be actually really helpful too.
And looking at Bone Splitters, I said Bone Splitters earlier was definitely a more board control army. They have a lot of ways to control the board. None of those tools really come into play outside of the Wargog Prophet in Big War. And most of those units, they're not really damage dealers per se. They're more there just to be lots of wounds that just soaks damage and halts the board. So in Big War, oh sorry.
I was just going to say, like, does a unit of Savage Orcs give you? Because obviously, Battle Line is now a challenge with the changes in the Ardboy change. I was just having a look. Bone Splitter, the Savage Oryx are 160 points for 10, so it puts you into the same area as Brutes. So it doesn't actually solve your problem at all.
No, and you're not getting a unit that's built for this like momentum Big War can have. And plus, they're missing out on other important combat tools such as exploding sixes and mortal wounds on sixes to wound. They almost play better in a combat way in Bone Splitters as opposed to Big War. Hence why you don't really see a lot of Bone Splitters.
No,
Even like Big Stabbers, even Big Stabbers right now are like direct competitors with Rages. And I know what I take 100% of the time.
Yeah, I was just having a look at your other options, right? Like Boar Boys and Arrow Boys are all battle line in a sub faction of Bone Splitters, so you can't even choose a general to unlock them as battle line if you wanted to make it battle line in Bone Splitters. Your big stabbers, I mean, they're 4 wounds each, which is, but you're buying them in individuals, right? 100.
You get 2 for 100.
So, yeah, I was pull that up on my phone. You get 2, so you get eight wounds for 100 points. Where right now the Rages are 9 wounds for 100 points, so relatively comparable. They kind of have a profile that's similar to the Cleaver.
Yeah,
and
but
obviously
slightly less attacks than the Rages.
3 attacks each. The Stabbers, so you get 6 attacks from the 2, or
9 from the 3.
Yeah, okay. But these guys trigger mortals, so you... Yeah.
Yeah. I think the only Bone Splitters units I'd probably ever take would just be the 3 Wizards.
Yeah, I think the fact that you trade off the run and charge, and if you really needed mortal wounds, instead of you would just use the what's the variety, whatever the one that has mortal wounds on. Yeah, the one that does mortal wounds on 6s. Like if you wanted mortal wounds, you'd probably do that over the big stabbers.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Is there any other units I haven't talked about? Yeah. I mean, there's obviously a lot of units we haven't talked about. I'm just seeing if there's anything else that kind of fills the slots. You've got so many heroes. Like this feels like
Oh yeah,
Stormcast. You have so many heroes, and you've got some interesting units, but a lot of them are not going to fill the slot like we just talked about. So, hmm,
I know
there's
if
some
you
interesting.
technically want to go cheaper than brutes, you can always take 10 gut rippers and the 10 hobgrots.
Does
You'll
that
you'll
work
get
with does that work with Big Block? Because like for every one unit of Gut Rippers, you can make one unit of Hobgrots Battle Line. Is that
yeah.
is that Cruel Boy specific or is that Big War too?
I think it's just in general. Um, so with
Yeah,
that combo, you get 230 points for 2 battle line, as opposed to 2 units of brutes for 280. So if you really want to skim on points, you can do that.
yeah, yeah. It's not Cruel Boy specific. It's a absolutely for every unit of the Gut Rippers who are currently 150, you can take a unit of the Hobgrot Splitters and that makes them battle line too. So yeah, that's a good option if you wanted to. If you're, I guess what I'm thinking about is if you're feeling the punch of the Art Boys and you're like, most of my list is really good. I don't want to move away from it. How do I find a battle line option or how do I build around it without gutting my army? That could be an option. But I
Yeah,
think, long story short, there's a lot of great options, a lot of things you can do, and probably a good time to revisit your army in general. If you don't have Cruel Boys, you might want to include at least a Cruel Boy unit for the battle tactic. You may want to reconsider some of the other choices. I think the fact that we've got some new units like the Rager and the Weird Brutes, or even a Piggy or there's a
yeah,
couple of units that are worth considering, and that might trigger a whole list review rather than just trying to force something into your current list
yeah,
because you like it.
yeah, absolutely. I think all in all, Big War probably has won out with these new units. They did take the hit of the Ard Boys, but what we did get in return were not only Ironjaw units that were really good, well, that are just really good in general, but they can be taken even further with a War Channel.
Mm.
They can operate on their own. Um, so like you might be an army with one War Channel. Okay, well, I don't need the Rages to have +1 damage. They're already damaged too. I'll put that on the Brutes. Yeah, they're just. I think they're really good right now, despite the Art Boy change.
Yeah, I agree. I think the Rages definitely would be something I'd put into my list. Austin, any final thoughts or comments? It is getting late on a Sunday. It's a Monday. It's a public holiday. Why do I keep saying Sunday? Like this is I'm losing it. I'm completely losing the plot.
It's all
It's
the flagellant
Monday.
painting.
It is all the flagellant painting. I don't have flatulence. I've been painting a lot of flagellants. So ready to all whip you. And no, I'm not whipping you at LVO. But Austin, any final thoughts or comments about the Big War? I'm thinking they're in a good spot. They are proving to be successful and capturing Orc people's interests yet again. For a number of reasons that we've kind of highlighted over the last 2 hours. But is there anything else you want to share with us?
Yeah, I mean, if you're looking to jump into Big War or maybe even Orcs in general, this is the best time for it. Meta wise, they're doing great in this season. They're eating big. You've got a bunch of these new units that look really cool. And a lot of them are great. Um, and if you really want to play, maybe if you're a cities player and you want to play, I want to play cities but different. Big War's Big War's your boy. There's a lot to love about Big War.
You're definitely convincing me. No, actually not. I think if I played Orcs, I'm playing Ironjaws. I'm an Ironjaw player. I think in my heart, I just like ABC. Always be charging. Just charge.
Well, yeah,
I
but
like
like Iron Jaws just yeets their units, but Big War tactically yeets their units.
true, but I got Gits. Gits are like that tactical, like big brain thinking. But final question, and then I'll let you wrap us up. Prediction time. So
Hmm.
there's been a lot of speculation, and that the Bone Splitters may be retired in fourth edition or the next book. Do you believe in the hype? And if you do you think they will be replaced completely with something new, or do you think it'll just be Kruleboyz, Iron Jaws, Big War, just with the combination of two?
As much as I love my naked orcs, um, it's an army that's been struggling, and as we've seen with these new points adjustments, they're not getting anything. And even in some of the Meta Watch stats have come up, sometimes they just don't even appear in there. It almost seems like to me they just want to just kill this army off, in my opinion.
Do you think it's like a relaunch, or do you think it's like? And the reason I say this, folks, is because if you're thinking about investing into Bone Splitters, I guess, are we
Yeah,
erring of caution that, like, I would not go out and buy a bunch of new stuff? If you find it cheap on like a secondhand store, yeah, go grab it, but know that there could be a risk that it's going. But what I'm hearing is you think that their time might be coming to an end sometime in the distant future.
I think so. Like if they get a revamp, fantastic. Just doesn't look like it though. They might be getting prepared for the old world. They like Bone Splitters weren't really a popular army to begin with, and like they didn't have a lot of representation. It's a lot of old models. Yeah, I just don't think they're gonna survive into 4.0. Kind of makes me
Right.
wish they just kill them off now and just rip the band-aid off.
Yeah, yeah. Who knows? Who knows what they'll do? Maybe we're wrong. Maybe it's a complete, brand new relaunch. Maybe, who knows? Who knows? Maybe there's a plastic rogue idol coming for all we know. But
But,
I guess tread with caution if you want to buy things like your war,
yeah,
even like your Wargog Prophet. Is that going to stay around?
probably not. I'm gonna have to miss him maybe.
Maybe it becomes an Iron Jaws unit.
Yeah, I would like that a lot actually. But
I think
worst
probably
case
would.
scenario, if you've got Bone Splitters and maybe you don't have Kruleboyz, just play them as Kruleboyz. They're on the same basis.
Move the war scroll in the piggies and everything else, like the ball boys, not the gore grunters,
Yeah.
the ball boys. I think they're probably coming to an end, but
I mean, look, the ball boys can just become Cities of Sigma Cavaliers. They're
it's like
mercenaries. It makes sense.
they're wild gur piggies for Cavaliers. All right,
Yeah,
Austin, we're getting into weird territory right now.
yeah.
Any shout outs, anyone you want to say hello to, or if people want to talk to you on the interwebs? I know you're on Twitter/X and Discord. Like, shout out and tell us where people can find you.
I don't want people to find me because I just don't want that in my life right now. But shout out to my Central Coast crew. They're called Crackhammer, always representing at the local New South Wales tournaments. A lot of variation. Shout out to I think just all the AOS players in general that I've played against. All lovely individuals. Shout out to the Big War chat in your own Discord, coming up with all the crazy ideas that they do and helping me get a good foot in the door for Big War. It's a very good place to, if you want to learn more, it's a great place to just pick it up. And shout out to my folks for fun.
Shout out, folks.
Yeah.
Hello, Austin's folks. All right, so I hope you enjoyed this discussion. I hope you found it interesting. I hope you are now interested in potentially playing Big War, whether you are an existing Big War player and you're picking up your toys again, or you are someone who plays Iron Jaws or Kruleboyz and you're looking to add some diversity and some maybe refresh the way that you play with some different styles, because Big War does play very differently to Kruleboyz, definitely plays differently to Iron Jaws. So you can take those same models, try it in a completely different style and see what works for you. Or what does your list look like if you add something completely different that you haven't been able to add in the past? So a good way to refresh your toys with a new play style. But Austin, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciated the chat. I look forward to being stared at a couple of times again when we meet up again. Hopefully you blow yourself up for once. The amount of sixes this boy rolls, I'm going to start seeing if he's got those toilet dice from the UK.
Nah, he's gonna live in your walls, coach.
I'm going to personally get this model put into the old world just purely for you. and I'm going to celebrate in your face.
I'm going to stare your Carl France to death in the old world.
You're a dick. All right, folks. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you. And you know what the deal. Leave in the comment section. What are you thinking? Is there units that we didn't talk about or combinations we didn't talk about that you think are worth discussing? Because there's a lot, and we can go into a lot of tech. There's a lot of cool things to discuss, and I'm sure there'll be erratas and FAQs for the new units as well, and maybe some points adjustments. I do feel brutes might be a little bit too overcosted, and that obviously then triggers a completely different conversation. But Austin, thank you for your time. Everyone, I hope you enjoy the chat, and we'll chat again soon.
Cheers.
Bye. Thanks for hanging around until the end. I hope you enjoyed that video and you walked away with a few new ideas. Now, if you did, I would love it if you pressed like on the video, as well as left me a comment with your thoughts. The conversation will continue over on Discord, and the link is down below in the episode description. I also want to give a massive shout out to the AOS Coach patrons and YouTube members who are supporting the channel and the growth that you're seeing here. So cheers, you are all bloody legends. And until next time, don't roll a double one on a spellcast.